A voice echoes loudly through the grand ballroom, yelling out Olive's name with authority and finality. It's Enobria Oscar, the distinguished son of the Marquis, standing tall in his formal attire. He exclaims with dramatic flair that he's officially calling off their engagement in front of everyone present. Olive stays completely quiet for several long moments, processing the shocking announcement. Then she questions what exactly he's saying to her right now. She looks directly at him with wide eyes, asking if he really doesn't want to marry her anymore after all this time. This is Olive Vyas speaking, the proud daughter of the Duke, her voice carrying both confusion and disbelief. Enobria responds with cold certainty that she knows perfectly well why he's taking this drastic action. He trusts that he doesn't have to explain his reasons any further to her or anyone else. Whispers immediately start spreading through the crowd like wildfire, with curious onlookers eager to gossip about this dramatic scene. One of the elegantly dressed women says that Olive may be temperamental and difficult to handle, but Enobria wasn't particularly opposed when the two powerful families originally arranged this marriage, was he? Another man in the crowd chimes in, saying he heard disturbing rumors that Olive would torment any women who even tried to get close to Enobria socially. He adds that talk about being overbearing, no wonder Enobria can't stand it anymore and wants out. Olive thinks to herself with growing realization that this is a scene directly from the popular novel Aria of the Imperial Rose. She remembers reading this exact confrontation multiple times before. Enobria turns toward the entrance and announces that His Highness the Crown Prince happens to be here as well to witness this momentous occasion. Heavy footsteps are heard approaching as the crowd murmurs excitedly, saying "Here comes His Highness," and they respectfully step aside to create a clear path. Olive thinks to herself that she has read this particular book back to front over 10 times, memorizing every plot twist and character detail. The approaching figure is Reynold Hurt, the Crown Prince himself, looking every bit as regal as described. Enobria addresses him formally, saying, "Your Highness, please be my witness to this important declaration." Olive thinks to herself with dawning horror that little did she ever imagine she'd one day become an actual character living inside the novel she knew so well. She has somehow become Olive Vyas, the cutthroat supporting female character who is always up to no good and causing trouble. In the original story's ending, Olive dies a completely miserable death that's totally befitting any villain. Olive says to herself with panic, No, she absolutely doesn't want to die like that. She has become the exact person she always hated while reading. How is she going to reject all of his suffocating romantic advances now? The truth is, she's actually Jian Mi, a humble office worker from the modern world. She had been working late in the office until 1 a.m., helping her coworker prepare an important PowerPoint presentation for their morning meeting. It was during that exhausting night that she suddenly died of a massive heart attack, then somehow time traveled to the world in the novel that she read so obsessively. Now she has become the character she despised the most throughout her reading experience. She is now Olive Vyas, the sinful daughter of the Duke, known for her terrible reputation. Could this transformation be some kind of cosmic punishment because she was always harshly criticizing this character in online discussion forums? Who knows what forces brought this about? In the original story, Olive was executed by the Crown Prince for framing the innocent heroine Corellia and completely ruining her family's stellar reputation. Enobria breaking off the engagement was exactly what led to Olive's eventual demise and downfall. Why can't she catch a break in either life? She already died once in her previous existence, and now she's definitely going to die again in this world. The prince speaks with royal authority, asking Olive Vyas if she has any objections to the engagement being formally annulled. Olive looks at him directly and stares in amazement. She exclaims to herself that he's incredibly handsome and attractive. He's way better looking than she ever imagined in her head while reading. The novel is filled with all kinds of good-looking guys with amazing descriptions. Does that mean she can potentially have many different lovers in this world? A familiar voice is suddenly heard saying that these false rumors circulating must have her feeling quite upset. Olive looks around the crowd thinking to herself, who exactly is speaking? What makes this person think she's upset about the situation? A woman steps forward gracefully and says she finds all of this drama hard to believe. They must be exaggerating the stories about Olive. As an educated woman of good breeding, she's absolutely sure Olive wouldn't do such barbarous things that people are claiming. These people simply must be mistaken about her true character. It's Corellia Neilette, the refined daughter of the Earl, speaking with gentle conviction. Corellia continues, saying she's completely sure that Enobria will forgive Olive as long as she properly explains herself and clears up these misunderstandings. Olive thinks to herself that this is the heroine of the novel Corellia, also known throughout the kingdom as the Imperial White Rose. The crowd immediately exclaims that absolutely no one is mistaken about Olive's behavior. They insist that Olive doesn't deserve Carelia's generous trust and faith. They declare that Olive has no manners whatsoever, and they wish she was even half as good and virtuous as Carelia. Olive thinks to herself that Carelia always struck her as a weird and suspicious person when she read the book originally. According to the novel's description, she's supposed to be innocent and compassionate, but Olive always felt that she was putting on an elaborate act for everyone. Olive continues thinking to herself that, for example, Carelia seemed to be speaking up for Olive just now in her defense, but all she was really trying to do was subtly insinuate that Olive was uncivilized and barbaric. In the original novel, Olive attacks Carelia in a blind fury after this public humiliation, which negatively impacts her public image even further and seals her fate. The Crown Prince, who already had a terrible impression of Olive from previous encounters, began to actively dislike her even more intensely, and eventually this leads to her execution. The prince, growing visibly impatient with the delay, asks again with authority, Olive Vyas, does she have any objections to this arrangement? Olive gets startled, thinking to herself, good lord, she completely forgot to answer him properly. He's the exact person who's going to kill her in the future. This is definitely not the time to zone out. Olive gracefully lifts her elegant gown and kneels down respectfully, saying, no, your highness, she has absolutely no objection. She continues by saying she has long wanted the engagement to be completely annulled anyway. The prince looks startled by this unexpected response and says, oh, with genuine surprise. Olive explains with a confident smile that in fact, she had fallen deeply for someone else entirely, but because of the binding engagement, she didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about her true feelings. Olive smiles more broadly and says thank you to Enobria for finally fulfilling her secret wish and setting her free. Olive thinks to herself with satisfaction that Playboy Enobria told everyone at this fancy party that he'd have the engagement annulled, which was clearly designed to make Olive a complete laughingstock in front of high society. Now he's gotten a taste of his own bitter medicine, and she's turned the tables on him perfectly. Olive politely apologizes for allowing her personal romantic affairs to disrupt the evening's festivities, saying she'll leave the party at once to avoid further embarrassment. Carelia smiles sweetly and says she had absolutely no idea that Olive had genuine feelings for someone else. She adds that now that the engagement has been officially cancelled, Olive will probably be getting married to this other mysterious person very soon, won't she? Olive stops in her tracks, thinking to herself that this comment reminds her of a major problem. Since the engagement has been called off, the powerful Vyas family is absolutely sure to find a new suitable fiancé for Olive as quickly as possible. There are so many handsome guys described in the novel that she hasn't met yet, and she's honestly curious about them. But how can she get married to any of them right now? She absolutely has to come up with a clever excuse for staying completely single. Carelia continues with fake concern, saying that not even an excellent man like Enobria could win Olive's heart and affection. She says she's genuinely curious about who this other mystery man could possibly be that's so much better. Olive thinks to herself that there's one method that's absolutely guaranteed to keep all men at bay and maintain her freedom. Olive announces clearly that it's the crown prince she's attracted to. Carelia looks completely startled by this bold declaration, and the prince himself remains silent with shock. They both say simultaneously, what? Olive repeats with conviction that she's genuinely attracted to His Highness and has been for some time. Olive thinks to herself that she's counting on him to help her out of this impossible situation, Your Highness, whether he realizes it or not. The prince immediately steps back, thinking to himself that this is a completely foolish woman making ridiculous claims. The prince becomes quite agitated internally, thinking to himself what kind of absolute nonsense is she sputtering in public like this. Olive thinks to herself that in the original novel, Olive's domineering father arranged several different blind dates almost immediately after she lost her fiancé. She clearly remembers the scene where Wildino Vyas, the Duke and Olive's intimidating father, exclaims that she must pick one name from his prepared list of suitors. These men had all been forced by their own families to go out with Olive despite her reputation. Olive had developed a completely notorious reputation throughout the kingdom. She was genuinely despised by absolutely all of high society. Unsurprisingly, none of these arranged meetings would go well, and they would only contribute to her eventual downfall and the tragic ending she's desperate to avoid. Her reputation becomes significantly worse with each passing day. Olive holds her head in her hands and thinks to herself that it's definitely not going to be easy putting up with all these blind dates her father keeps arranging. If someone takes a real shine to her personality and looks, she'll inevitably have to get hitched to them according to her father's wishes. But if she actively sabotages these dates on purpose, people will speak ill of her behind her back and spread nasty rumors. Neither outcome seems necessarily ideal for her future, so there's really only one viable option left. Corellia stays completely quiet while seething with anger, thinking to herself that usually when she deliberately provokes Olive during social gatherings, Olive blows her top spectacularly and people naturally come to the conclusion that Corellia is obviously better than her in every way. Why didn't Olive make a complete fool of herself today like she normally does? Not only that, but she actually told the Crown Prince directly how she feels about him in front of everyone. Olive thinks to herself that now that absolutely everyone knows she has deep romantic feelings for the Crown Prince, her dad definitely won't force her to marry anyone else against her will. After all, there's absolutely no way the Crown Prince would ever marry someone like her. She'll probably never get married to anyone at this rate. The prince says politely that Miss Vyas, they hardly know each other well enough for such declaration. Olive acts dramatically and says whatever does he mean by that? They've definitely spent time together before at various social events. Doesn't he remember those occasions at all? The prince looks very confused and uncomfortable by this entire situation as Olive runs off while acting like she's crying, saying that anyway, she will never stop loving him no matter what happens. The prince thinks to himself what a completely disgusting display of false emotion she's putting on. She's obviously just using him as a distraction from her real problems. Olive thinks to herself that she's sorry, Your Highness, but he should enjoy the incredibly awkward atmosphere she's leaving behind because she's definitely out of here. Whispers can be heard throughout the crowd where one woman says it really seems like Olive is genuinely into His Highness romantically. Another woman responds that she's not surprised at all because she means, who doesn't want to become the crown princess someday? Corellia stands there with a satisfied grin on her face, thinking to herself that Olive actually thinks she stands even a chance in hell of becoming the crown princess. Corellia knows that she's the only one who truly deserves to stand beside him as his future wife. Olive runs out of the grand mansion and looks up at the evening sky, saying to herself that so this is what the world described in the novel actually looks like in person. The sky honestly isn't so different from the one in her original world back home. It's completely boundless and stretches endlessly in all directions. She realizes that she has been working overtime so much lately in her previous life that she never really had a chance to properly look at the sky and appreciate its beauty. Olive tears up while thinking to herself whether she's really dead and gone from her old world. She still can't believe that she's now living in a completely different world entirely. Now that she has been given this unexpected new life, no matter what challenges and obstacles lie ahead of her, she absolutely has to make the most of this incredible opportunity. She promises herself that she'll live to at least 100 years old. Olive tries motivating herself by telling herself to come on, she can definitely do this. She has a simple dream that any Otome game player would understand perfectly. She exclaims to herself with determination that she will enjoy her life to the fullest. She will get to know every single handsome. Olive says to herself with amazement that his hair is a beautiful bluish-violet color, just like the stunning color of the sky during sunset. She realizes that this must be Raoul, who serves as Olive's personal knight and protector. Raoul says respectfully that the carriage is waiting outside and ready for their departure. Olive questions whether he's really Raoul, the character she read about. She happily moves towards him while thinking to herself that she felt so incredibly sorry for him when she read about his treatment in the book. He's such a little cutie pie and doesn't deserve the abuse. Raoul immediately gets down on all fours in preparation as Olive stares at him with complete confusion. Raoul has this distinctly impatient look on his face as Olive realizes to herself that the original Olive always steps on him to mount her horse like he's some kind of stepping stool. She thinks that poor guy, how could anyone treat such a good-looking and loyal person so poorly? Olive quickly picks him up from his degrading position and says firmly that such treatment won't be necessary anymore as she gets into the carriage by herself. Raoul gets back up while thinking to himself suspiciously about what she could possibly be up to this time. Olive completely forgot that Raoul absolutely hates to be touched by the original Olive due to her past behavior. It's so incredibly frustrating to be hated by a character she genuinely likes and respects. Olive sighs deeply and says to herself that one day he'll finally know that she's completely different from the old Olive who treated him badly. He'll eventually change his mind about her character and stop hating her so intensely. A maid suddenly arrives at the carriage and says respectfully that his lordship wants to see her immediately in his study. Olive asks if he really wants to see her at this particular hour. She figures it probably has something to do with what happened this evening at the banquet. Olive thinks to herself that this exact scenario was definitely in the novel as well, though it wasn't described in much detail. The maid pulls open the heavy door as Olive thinks to herself that the entire confrontation was covered in just one brief sentence in the original story. The text simply stated that the Duke was absolutely furious and he punished Olive severely for her action. The Duke exclaims angrily as soon as she enters, demanding to know what exactly she did at the banquet tonight. Olive kneels down respectfully as the Duke continues exclaiming with obvious frustration, asking what is wrong with her tonight. He demands to know why she suddenly cancelled her engagement with Enobria out of nowhere and then confessed her feelings to the Crown Prince in front of everyone. The Duke glares at her intensely as Olive says carefully, "Father, please listen to her explanation. It was actually Enobria who suddenly mentioned the engagement cancellation at the banquet first. He called off their engagement in front of everyone present, and now they all think it was because she did something terrible that he simply can't tolerate. She asks him to consider how everyone will treat her from now on with this reputation." Olive exclaims that she's his only daughter, and if her reputation is completely ruined, their entire family will also be negatively affected by the scandal. She tells him that she doesn't mind her own name being tarnished and dragged through the mud, but she absolutely can't drag everyone else in the family down with her. The Duke becomes all startled as he processes what Olive just says and asks if that's what she really has in mind. Olive confirms that yes, that's exactly what she means. She explains that she did everything she did for the sake of their family, not for any selfish reasons like everyone seems to think. The Duke finds himself thinking deeply about this unexpected response from his daughter. She always retorts right away and throws a massive tantrum whenever he scolds her about anything, but she's being so calm and collected today that it's actually making him feel unsettled. And now she's saying she's thinking for the people in the family and their well-being? This doesn't sound like the Olive he knows at all. The Duke slowly gets up from his ornate chair and walks towards her with measured steps, his expression unreadable as he says her name softly, Olive. He pauses for a moment before continuing, telling her that she has changed somehow. He can sense something different about her today. Olive feels her heart racing as she thinks to herself that, oh no, this is bad. She went completely out of character while she was talking her way out of punishment just now. She needs to stay calm and not mess this up any further. She has to be more careful about how she acts from now on. Olive nervously clenches her expensive cloth dress between her fingers, feeling the fabric bunch up as she addresses her father again. She tells him that when Enobria canceled the engagement so suddenly and publicly, she realized that she indeed made some terrible mistakes before. The whole situation made her reflect on her past behavior, so she has decided to turn over a new leaf and become a better person from now on. She wants to change for the better. The father suddenly exclaims nonsense, with such force that it echoes through the study. How could his precious daughter be wrong about anything? It's obviously all Enobria's fault for treating her this way. How dare he treat her with such disrespect and humiliation? No one should be allowed to hurt his daughter like this. Olive says ha in confusion, completely caught off guard by his reaction. She thinks to herself in bewilderment, is this really the same father who always gives Olive nothing but attitude and criticism in the novel? This doesn't match what she read at all. Something seems totally different about him. The Duke asks her directly, but does Olive really like the Crown Prince that much? Or is she just using him as a convenient excuse to avoid the blind dates he's been arranging? He needs to know the truth. Olive gets startled by the sudden question and quickly says that His Highness is an incredibly outstanding man who anyone would be lucky to be with. She really likes him genuinely, so please, she begs her father to stop arranging all these blind dates for her. She doesn't want to meet anyone else. The Duke nervously thinks to himself that the Crown Prince is no ordinary man though. There are so many complications that come with being involved with royalty. Olive insists to her father that she knows exactly what she's doing and she's thought this through carefully. The Duke finally sighs and says alright, she may leave now if that's all. Their conversation is over for today. Olive says okay and starts to leave the study. As she exits, a worker approaches the Duke and says Your Grace with a bow. They've carefully prepared a comprehensive list of excellent young men who are of age and from good families. Would you please check it since they spent so much time compiling it? The Duke waves his hand dismissively and says there is no need anymore. He doesn't need this list anymore, so they can dispose of it. The worker becomes completely shocked as he thinks to himself in amazement, did His Grace just smile slightly? He has never smiled even once since Her Grace passed away all those years ago. This is truly unprecedented. Outside the study, Olive lets out a huge sigh of relief and says to herself, whoa, that was absolutely scary and nerve-wracking. She guesses she didn't consume all those novels and animations in vain after all. She can't believe she actually talked her way out of it successfully. The Duke seems really easygoing compared to what she expected. He's completely different from the harsh description in the novel she read. She wonders why there's such a big difference. Whatever the reason, she's not going to dwell over it too much since it's over now. She should just think about her current situation and what to do next. Olive suddenly thinks to herself in panic, where is she now? Help! She has no idea where she's supposed to go. The novel didn't specify the exact location of Olive's room or give any directions about the mansion's layout. How does she get there without looking suspicious? She starts walking down the hallway hoping she'll figure it out somehow. Suddenly, a huge slap is heard echoing from the other room nearby. Olive becomes startled and freezes as angry voices are heard exclaiming, "You dirty rat from the slums." The voice continues berating someone, saying how can she mess up something so simple and basic? When Ms. Vyas returns, she'll surely strip her down and whip her as punishment. This is unacceptable behavior from a servant. Olive thinks to herself in confusion, wait, is she talking about her? Is she Ms. Vyas? The maid exclaims back defiantly, saying she didn't trip at all like they're accusing her of. The teapot exploded completely on its own. Before it burst into pieces, she noticed a visible crack on it that was already there. The head maid exclaims angrily, what does she mean? Is she saying there was something wrong with the teapot she gave her? Is she trying to blame the equipment instead of taking responsibility? Olive decides to intervene and says firmly that's enough of this arguing. She tells the maid to get up from the floor as she reaches out her hand to help her up. The maid looks at the extended hand but wouldn't give her own hand because of how startled and scared she was of Olive. She just stares at it in fear. Olive slowly retracts her hand, thinking to herself that Olive's image is so terrible that everyone is extremely wary of her. Even when she's trying to help, people are afraid. Olive tells the maid, whose name she now knows as Jules, to get up from the floor. She says it's fine, just clean up the mess carefully. She notices Jules' hand is badly scalded from the hot water, so she should go now and put some ointment on it before it gets worse. Jules stays completely quiet, not daring to speak or move. Olive thinks to herself as she observes the scene that the teapot's fragments are scattered on the platter. It obviously shattered on its own from that crack. Yet Rona claimed that Jules broke it through clumsiness. She's clearly putting the blame on Jules purposefully to get her in trouble. Employees who are often made a scapegoat like this despise superiors who treat them so unfairly. Rona exclaims, Ms. Vyas, she dashed, trying to continue her accusations against Jules. Olive cuts her off and asks if there is any problem that needs addressing. Olive thinks to herself that as long as she acts cool and confident enough, no evil forces or petty servants can defeat her. She just needs to maintain her composure. Rona looks down at the floor, clearly unwilling to back down but unable to challenge Olive directly. She quietly says no, there's no problem. Olive says it's getting quite late and she wants to sleep soon, so clean this mess up now and then leave her quarters. Rona says got it reluctantly. As Rona cleans up the broken pieces, she glares hatefully at Jules when she thinks Olive isn't looking. The tension in the room is thick and uncomfortable. The scene cuts to late at night in Olive's chambers. Olive thinks to herself while lying in her luxurious bed that living as Olive feels just like going to her regular work back in her world. They're both equally tiring and draining in different ways. She has to constantly watch what she says and does. Olive closes her eyes trying to sleep and suddenly remembers terrible voices from the novel saying it was her. She's an evil woman. The voices continue, saying she summoned a snake with black magic and put Corellia in mortal danger. If His Highness hadn't rushed over at that exact time to save her, Corellia would have died because of her wickedness. She's a monster who doesn't deserve to live. She deserves to die for her crimes. The word die keeps repeating over and over in her head like a horrible echo as she sees herself exclaiming desperately, Your Highness, please hear her out. She's begging for her life. And then she sees the Crown Prince telling her coldly to say that to his sword instead. There will be no mercy for her crimes against Corellia. Olive suddenly wakes up from her terrible nightmare, gasping for breath as she thinks to herself that she just dreamed of Olive's dark future. Indeed, she gets more nightmares when she sleeps without drawing the heavy curtains closed. The moonlight seems to bring bad dreams. A knock is heard at her door, with someone asking Ms. Vyas, is she awake? The voice sounds nervous and hesitant. Olive gets up from her bed and opens the door to see who it is. A maid stands there holding something and says she has an invitation from the Nielette family that just arrived. Olive thinks to herself in confusion, the Nielette family? It's from Corellia? Why is she inviting her of all people? They're supposed to be enemies. She takes the invitation and sees that Corellia has invited her to attend a tea party at their estate. Olive puts the envelope down on her desk and ponders to herself about what this means. In the novel, after the conflict with Olive at the grand banquet where everything went wrong, Corelia surprisingly let the incident pass without seeking revenge. Instead, she invited Olive to her family's tea party so they could make up and reconcile. But unexpectedly, things didn't go as planned at all. Something terrible happened at that tea party that sealed Olive's fate forever. Olive remembers vividly in her memory that both she and Corelia end up wearing the exact same dress to the party. An incredibly awkward situation occurs when people notice the matching outfits. People exclaim loudly that Olive couldn't stand seeing Corelia wearing the same beautiful outfit as her own. In a fit of rage and jealousy, Olive grabs a full glass of water from a nearby table and splashes it directly on Corelia without any warning. Corelia stands there completely embarrassed and thoroughly drenched from head to toe. So Olive ruined Corelia's expensive dress right then and there, and her absolutely outrageous action once again angered everyone present at the social gathering. Olive thinks to herself that in sharp contrast to the flawless and graceful Corelia, the original Olive was often belittled and looked down upon by society. Out of pure indignation and hurt feelings, she kept acting recklessly and impulsively, and ended up being completely ostracized by everyone who mattered. If she wants to escape her inevitable tragic ending, she might have to stay completely away from Corelia and avoid any confrontations. She'd definitely better not go to this party at all. Olive puts down the invitation letter and gets up from her chair with a heavy sigh. Olive stays completely quiet and thinks to herself that no, actually escaping is probably the most foolish way to protect herself from future problems. If she genuinely wants to live in this world peacefully and with proper dignity, she absolutely needs to change everyone's negative impression of the original Olive's character. She must go to this party and face the situation head-on. Olive, feeling completely determined now, opens her large closet and thinks to herself that firstly, she needs to avoid wearing the same outfit as Corelia at all costs. But unfortunately, she has absolutely no idea what dress Corelia was wearing at that particular time in the original story. Olive decisively slams the closet door shut, turns around quickly, and says that Rona, there she is, perfect timing. Olive, all excited about her new plan, asks Rona to prepare the carriage for her immediately because she's going out shopping. Olive thinks to herself that the safest way to handle this situation is to go out into town and buy a completely new outfit that definitely won't match anything Corelia might wear. Bird chirps are heard in the distance as they finally arrive at their destination in the bustling town. Raoul, who now has a noticeable wound on his face, looks directly at Olive with a guarded expression. Olive exclaims with genuine concern, asking what happened to his face and who hurt him. Raoul, looking all confused and uncomfortable, looks away quickly while saying that he simply tripped and fell. Olive exclaims that there's absolutely no way he got hurt from just falling down like that because that's obviously a sword cut from a blade. Olive reaches out toward his face to examine the wound more closely as Raoul gets completely pissed off and slaps her hand away roughly, telling her firmly to not touch him at all. He asks angrily if she knows exactly what happened to him. He accuses her of mocking him by asking such obvious questions when she already knows the truth. Raoul glares at her with intense hatred as Rona exclaims angrily, calling him a bastard and demanding to know how he dares to hurt Miss Vias like that. The guards immediately move forward to take him away as punishment, but Olive says wait, no, please don't hurt Raoul. Raoul laughs bitterly and says that if she wants to punish him for his insubordination, she should just do it as usual like she always does. He asks why she's bothering to feign concern for his well-being now. He tells her that she disgusts him even more by acting this fake way. Olive thinks to herself with a heavy heart that he truly hates her now. Everything she does will be perceived as wrong to him, no matter her intention. Olive sighs deeply and says that she orders them to let him go immediately without any punishment. Rona, looking all startled by this unexpected command, says, "But Miss Vias, surely he should face consequences." Olive looks at her directly and asks if she doesn't understand what she just said clearly. Rona, trembling slightly from confusion, says that she's got it and understands. Raoul is let go and begins to walk past Olive, but she tells him to go back to the estate because she doesn't need him to guard her in the meantime. Olive thinks to herself that she should let him rest well for some time and recover from his injuries. Rona says respectfully that Miss Vias, she'll call another knight to escort her for protection. Olive says there's no need for that at all. She only wants Raoul as her personal guard and no one else. Raoul thinks to himself that something definitely feels off again about her behavior. Has she come up with another creative way to make fun of him and humiliate him? They finally arrive at their destination as Olive, all excited about this new adventure, says wow with amazement. So this is the famous commercial district that was described in the novel. It's incredibly lively and bustling with activity. Olive tells the carriage driver to park at the roadside and watch the carriage carefully while she walks around on her own to explore. The driver says yes, Miss Vyas, he'll keep watch. Olive says whoa with wonder as she looks around. There are so many fascinating things she has never seen before in her previous life. They all look so interesting and unique. She wants to buy absolutely everything she sees. Olive's long-lost shopping desire is suddenly awakened after being suppressed for so long. As she walks around admiring the various shops and vendors, someone suddenly rushes toward her and snatches her purse right out of her hands. Olive stares at her now empty hands and exclaims in shock about her purse being stolen. Olive says that all of her beloved money is in there and she needs it. She tells the thief to stop right there and calls him a thief as Olive chases after him with determination. She exclaims for people to help her catch the thief. The thief bumps into a woman who was carrying a basket and drops all the apples the woman was carrying for sale. The apples start falling directly towards Olive as she says oh no with alarm. She realizes she can't dodge this incoming barrage of fruit. Olive closes her eyes tightly and prepares for the impact as someone suddenly catches all the apples skillfully. He throws one apple to her hand and tells her politely to please wait for just a while. Olive, looking all confused by this sudden turn of events, watches as the mysterious man starts chasing the thief who stole her purse. The mysterious man kicks the thief forcefully to the ground as he picks up Olive's stolen purse from where it fell. Olive asks with genuine concern if he's okay and whether he got hurt during the confrontation. The man lifts himself up gracefully and gives the purse back to her, saying simply that here it is, safe and sound. Olive says thank you with sincere gratitude for his help. She looks up at the man, smiling warmly at his kindness. He responds gallantly that it's truly an honor to help such a beautiful lady in distress. Olive stays completely quiet as she admires internally how incredibly handsome this stranger is. The thief suddenly struggles against his restraints and grabs his sharp knife from his belt with desperate determination. Olive notices the dangerous situation developing and tells the man urgently to watch out because the thief is about to stab him from behind. The man turns around swiftly and grips the hand of the thief tightly, preventing the attack. He then kicks the criminal hard in the stomach with his knee, effectively neutralizing the threat. Olive watches the scene, completely stunned but also deeply impressed by his fighting abilities. The man looks back at her and releases the now defeated thief, saying apologetically that he's sorry for scaring her with the violence. Olive quickly says that she's perfectly fine and wasn't frightened at all. Olive thinks to herself with amazement that the novel world is so incredibly interesting and exciting. How could a random kind passerby who just happened to be walking by look so remarkably good? And on top of his good looks, he's obviously so skilled in fighting and self-defense. She feels completely charmed by this unexpected encounter. Olive lifts her fingers politely and asks if he can possibly wait for her just a bit longer while she handles something. The man says of course he can wait, he's in no hurry whatsoever. Olive approaches the elderly lady who dropped all her apples during the commotion with the thief. Olive says she's genuinely sorry for the trouble as she carefully puts each apple back in the woman's basket. She apologizes sincerely for knocking her fruits flying everywhere and promises that she'll compensate her fairly for any damage. Olive gives the woman a generous amount of money and asks politely if this amount is enough to cover her losses. The woman exclaims happily that it definitely is more than enough. She thanks Olive repeatedly, saying thank you so much, miss, for your incredible kindness. Olive turns back to thank the man warmly for getting her wallet back for her safely. She tells him that this small gift is for him as a token of her appreciation, handing him some of the apples from the woman's basket. Olive takes a quick glance at a nearby bakery that smells absolutely delicious as the man notices her interest and asks if she likes cakes and sweet treats. He suggests that how about he treats her to some dessert as a way to celebrate their meeting. The scene transitions to show Olive stepping out of the cozy bakery, thanking the man once again for helping her with the thief situation. She explains that she really should have treated him to a proper meal instead, but unfortunately she has somewhere important to be soon. The man says thoughtfully that he hopes she doesn't dislike this little gift he's giving her. The man observes that she seems to have said thank you many times throughout their encounter, and asks hopefully if they can possibly meet again in the future. Olive responds with surprise, saying huh, and then thoughtfully says maybe they could meet again. Olive thinks to herself with excitement that of course she's absolutely fine with meeting such a handsome man again anytime. The man says with satisfaction that then he'll definitely look forward to their next encounter as he nods lightly and politely takes his leave. Olive remains dazed as she thinks to herself with wonder that my goodness, he's such a perfect gentleman in every way. They had such a textbook perfect romantic encounter, just like something out of a fairy tale. As the man walks away and disappears from view, his friendly smile completely vanishes from his face. He says coldly that Olive is apparently not as arrogant and rude as all the rumors claim she is, so they need to investigate her more thoroughly and carefully. The thief, who is actually working with him, responds with a sly smile that he's got it and understands the assignment perfectly. The man tells the thief specifically to focus on investigating her connection to the Crown Prince and what their relationship really entails. As he walks away, he carelessly throws away the apple gift she gave him. Olive says to herself with relief that she finally resolved one of her major concerns about the upcoming party. She's absolutely sure that no lady would ever wear something so simple and understated to such an important social gathering. A loud, angry yell is suddenly heard from Rona, who calls out Ms. Vyas urgently. Rona holds a frightened maid roughly by the head and explains violently that they've been missing food from the kitchen lately, and it turns out this girl is the thief they've been looking for. She declares triumphantly that she finally caught the culprit red-handed. Olive tells Rona firmly to let go of the maid first before they discuss anything further. Rona, looking all displeased by this interruption, explains that the maid stole bread this time from the kitchen supplies. The maid drops to the ground heavily as Rona continues ominously that next time she might steal Olive's precious jewelry, so they absolutely have to punish her severely to make an example. Olive stays completely quiet while pondering the situation carefully, then asks the maid directly if she actually stole the food as accused. The maid cries openly and admits honestly that yes, she did steal it. Olive tells her gently to lift her head and look at her properly. The maid looks up with a terrified expression as she notices Olive's hand reaching toward her face. She closes her eyes tightly, thinking desperately to herself that she's completely doomed and about to be severely punished. Instead, Olive softly touches her face with incredible gentleness and wipes away her tears with care. Olive asks with genuine concern why she felt the need to steal the food in the first place. The maid, looking all confused by this unexpected kindness, thinks to herself in amazement that wasn't Olive going to hit her as punishment? Olive asks with worry whether the maid is starving and doesn't have enough to eat. The maid explains through her tears that her younger brother is seriously sick with an illness. She spent absolutely all their money on expensive medicine for his treatment, so they can't afford to buy food anymore. She tells Olive that he's her only family left in the world, and she simply can't watch him slowly starve to death. That's why she stole the leftover scraps from the kitchen to feed him. Olive asks whether the brother also works here at the estate, and questions whether no one in the residence properly oversees these kinds of serious issues. The maid explains sadly that he's still far too young to work anywhere and earn money. Olive says that regardless of her desperate reasons, it's still fundamentally wrong to steal from others. She tells the maid gently that she can always come to her directly and tell her about her problems, so they can think of a proper solution together. But she absolutely shouldn't resort to stealing anymore, and asks if she can promise her that. The maid, with tears streaming down her face, says yes with complete sincerity. Olive tells her kindly to bring her sick brother here to the estate so he can share the leftover cake with her. She reassures her that she doesn't have to sneak around anymore or live in fear. The maid, completely moved by this unexpected compassion, tries to speak but can only manage to say that Ms. Vyas, she's absolutely incredible. The maid bows down deeply and says thank you so much, Ms. Vyas, for your amazing kindness. Olive says there, everything will be fine now, and tells her she may leave to go get her brother. The maid runs off happily as Rona approaches and says with confusion that Ms. Vyas, the girl stole something valuable. She demands to know how Olive could possibly let her off so easily like that. Rona argues that if she doesn't teach the maid a harsh lesson, other servants will definitely follow her bad habits and start stealing too. Olive says firmly that allowing theft to continue would be a complete failure on her part since Rona is supposed to be the head maid responsible for managing the household staff. Rona looks quite startled by this unexpected response from Olive. Olive continues by saying that they'll leave things at that for today, but she absolutely doesn't want something like this unfortunate situation to happen again in the future. She asks if Rona understands her position clearly. Rona stutters nervously and says yes, she understands completely. Olive turns around to leave and says that, by the way, since Rona is supposedly so capable at her job, she's absolutely sure that Rona won't let word about this incident get out to other people. She asks pointedly, right, Rona? Olive ponders to herself that in the original novel, Rona very often told on other servants to the original Olive and caused unnecessary trouble just to get rid of people she personally didn't like for a petty reason. Olive thinks that since she can't find someone suitable to replace Rona's position for now, she can only warn her about her behavior. She genuinely hopes that Rona doesn't make trouble like this again in the future. The scene cuts to Olive sighing deeply and thinking to herself that if only she could train servants that are truly loyal to her instead of scheming behind her back. But there's really no hurry to change everything at once. Olive arrives at the tea party with the invitation in hand as she thinks to herself that she still ended up coming to this social gathering even though she was somewhat forced and felt helpless about it. Olive takes a quick glance around the elegant venue and thinks to herself that Reynolds came quite early to the party. She thought he would arrive last since he's the crown prince and royalty usually makes grand entrances. Olive suddenly realizes with recognition that it's him from the bakery earlier. The kind stranger is also invited to this exclusive tea party, which means he must be nobility. The prince notices Olive's presence at the party as she freezes completely under his gaze. The prince looks away dismissively, thinking to himself whether she doesn't have any money to buy proper clothes for such occasion. Olive feels confused as she thinks to herself about why he glared at her so coldly just now. Compared to the scowling and unfriendly Reynolds, that kind passerby from earlier is much gentler and more pleasant to be around. She wonders which Marquis's son he might be, since he's obviously from a noble family. The original novel probably mentioned his name at some point, right? Olive becomes infatuated with her thoughts as she is suddenly blocked by two well-dressed women who step directly in front of her. One of the women pulls Olive back roughly and mocks her by asking why she keeps staring so obviously at His Highness like that. She asks sarcastically if Olive is going to try to flatter him again with more embarrassing public declaration. The woman says that Corellia is truly beautiful and elegant, unlike certain other people. They tell Olive sarcastically that at least Corellia isn't as shameless as someone they know who would confess to His Highness in public like that. She should take a good look at herself in the mirror and realize that she's completely out of his league. Olive remains speechless at their harsh words. The woman continues by telling Olive that aside from Corellia, absolutely no one else deserves to be with His Highness romantically. She emphasizes this point by looking directly at Olive with obvious disdain. The prince thinks to himself that since Olive used him as her shield at the previous event, she should be prepared to be targeted by others as a consequence. Olive says that she's genuinely curious about something. She asks if His Highness personally visited this woman in the middle of the night and whispered romantically in her ear that he likes Corellia. One of the women responds indignantly that she doesn't need His Highness to tell her anything directly. She says that everyone can clearly see that Olive is vicious and rude, and she's absolutely no match for Corellia in any way whatsoever. She asks if this isn't completely obvious to everyone present. She claims that everyone thinks Olive is unworthy of His Highness, so she's just telling the honest truth. Olive, looking all interested in this response, says, "Oh, is that really so?" Olive raises her hand dramatically and addresses the entire crowd, saying that if everyone thinks this way, they should raise their hands to show their agreement. She calls out for people to raise their hands if they think His Highness should marry Corellia instead. Everyone in the room suddenly turns away and avoids making any eye contact with her, creating an awkward atmosphere. An extremely awkward situation occurs as only two girls hesitantly raise their hands in the air. They think to themselves with confusion about why they actually did exactly as Olive said when she challenged them. Olive looks directly at His Highness and says that apparently some people here claim they can make important decisions for him regarding his personal life. The two women, looking all shocked by this turn of events, say quickly that no, they absolutely didn't mean it that way. The prince glares at them intensely as they desperately tell Olive to stop making things up and twisting their words. The prince puts his delicate teacup down firmly and exclaims that that's quite enough of this ridiculous discussion. He declares that it's completely up to him and him alone who he wants to marry in the future. He states firmly that he doesn't want to hear anyone discussing his private life and personal matters again. As for the two women who spoke out of turn, he tells them that they should stay at home if they haven't learned basic social manners yet. The blonde gentleman nearby laughs quietly to himself, thinking that Olive actually managed to make Reynolds lose his famous temper, which is honestly quite impressive. Corellia, feeling all pissed off, grits her teeth while thinking to herself that she thought Olive would throw a typical tantrum upon hearing those harsh words, which would make His Highness dislike her even more. She didn't expect that Olive would turn the tables so cleverly with just a few well-chosen words. Now Corellia is the one at fault for allowing her guests to gossip inappropriately about the crown prince at her own party. Corellia walks forward gracefully and says with her deepest apologies to His Highness for the uncomfortable situation. The prince says that it's perfectly fine and he's not holding her responsible. Corellia unwillingly grabs Olive's arm and says that the women didn't really mean what they said earlier. She apologizes sincerely on their behalf and asks if Olive won't take their words to heart, right? Olive responds that of course not, since she's not actually the one they offended with their inappropriate comments. Corellia stays completely quiet for a moment and then says that she's glad to hear that reasonable response. She suggests that they should sit together and enjoy the refreshments. Olive agrees and says sure, that sounds perfectly fine. Corellia explains that these delicious desserts were specially made by the talented new pastry chef she recently hired for her household. She tells everyone that she invited them all here today specifically so they can taste these wonderful creations together and give their opinions. Olive looks down at the elaborate spread of cakes and pastries, thinking to herself that she almost forgot that a major incident happened at this exact party in the original novel. Someone actually died from what happened here. In the novel, a young girl was severely allergic to peanuts, but she ate a peanut cake by mistake because she didn't realize what ingredients were used. The woman started suffering from a serious allergic reaction and went into dangerous anaphylactic shock. Olive remembers that Corellia quickly called for a doctor to try to save the girl's life and earned everyone's praise for her quick thinking and composure. Reynolds also began to develop romantic feelings for Corellia because of her impressive composure when faced with such a medical emergency. If Reynolds falls for Corellia right now as planned, how will Olive be able to ride on his coattails and use his political power? It will become much harder for her to take advantage of his influence like she did earlier today. For the sake of her own survival in this world, Reynolds absolutely can't start dating the female lead right now. At least not at this particular moment in the timeline. Olive says to herself that she's truly sorry, but she'll have to break up this destined couple for her own protection. Olive looks up and scans the room carefully, thinking to herself that it would be absolutely great if she can somehow find that particular girl and stop her from eating the dangerous cake and getting the severe allergic reaction that kills her. Olive says that she remembers the novel described her character as thin and delicate, with noticeable freckles scattered across her face. Olive thinks to herself with amazement that my gosh, everyone looks exactly the same as they were described in the original story. She wonders if extras in the novel don't deserve to be attractive or given unique features. It would definitely be better if she can somehow recall this particular character's name from her memory of the book. Olive hears someone nearby saying enthusiastically that Tatiana, the cake tastes absolutely great, so she should hurry up and try it before it gets cold. Olive thinks to herself with sudden recognition that Tatiana? Right, that's correct. Her name was definitely Tatiana in the original novel. Olive quickly turns around and sees her opening her mouth to take a bite of the cake. Olive exclaims loudly no and immediately holds her hand to stop her from eating. Tatiana looks completely confused by this sudden intervention as the other woman standing nearby asks with suspicion what Ms. Olive thinks she's doing right now. She demands to know if Olive is bullying Tatiana for no good reason. Olive says she was just trying to help, then takes the fork from Tatiana's hand and thinks to herself with panic that oh no, she was definitely too rash with her actions just now. Olive says diplomatically that her cake looks really good and appealing. She asks politely if they can exchange their cakes with each other. Olive thinks to herself hopefully that people usually don't get mad when she's being polite and respectful, so she really hopes this approach works better. The other woman exclaims indignantly why should they do exactly as Olive says just because she wants something. They absolutely refuse to exchange their desserts. She tells Tatiana firmly not to be scared of Olive's intimidating behavior. Corellia approaches the group with her usual calculating smile and says smoothly that Ms. Olive, if she likes this particular cake so much, she can easily tell the chef to make another one exactly like it. Olive says there's absolutely no need for that because she specifically wants this cake that belongs to Tatiana. Olive whispers something quietly and urgently into Tatiana's ear that the others can't hear clearly. Olive asks if she can take this specific cake from her now. Tatiana nods her head in agreement as the other woman asks with growing suspicion what exactly Olive told her in private. Tatiana says with concern that Olive said there are peanuts hidden in this particular cake. The woman exclaims with shock and disbelief, what did she just say? So Olive is taking someone else's cake just because she wants a peanut-flavored dessert for herself? She asks sarcastically if these are really the proper manners that Olive learned from the prestigious Duke of Orland. Tatiana mumbles quietly that's enough arguing about this situation. The prince, who has been observing from a distance, can hear their loud yapping and becomes quite annoyed by the entire spectacle. He thinks to himself with irritation that he honestly can't believe these supposed noble ladies are actually arguing over something as trivial as a single piece of cake. The prince notices something unusual and spots the blonde man staring directly at him with an intense expression. The prince asks with curiosity what's wrong with him. The blonde man responds smoothly that it's nothing particularly important. He smiles mysteriously and says he's just wondering how incredibly good that cake must be for the lady to specially exchange hers for it. The prince says coldly that whatever the reason might be, a noble lady absolutely shouldn't be causing such an unnecessary commotion in public. The blonde man says with surprise that he sees the prince's point completely. He thinks to himself with interest that this is actually Reynolds' first time ever commenting on the behavior of noble ladies. He thought Reynolds would be completely unaware of what was happening since he never usually looks at or pays attention to the ladies at social events. It definitely seems like Olive is really special to him in some way. Though all the information they have found so far clearly shows that he and Olive are not acquainted in any private capacity, that situation may very well change in the future. Perhaps he should find another opportunity to approach Olive and get to know her better. Olive sighs deeply with frustration and says, "Gosh, this didn't go as planned at all." She thinks to herself that she had carefully planned to act like a refined and elegant lady today in order to change her terrible reputation and public image, but it all went completely down the drain with this incident. Tatiana says urgently that Ms. Vyas should please wait as she chases after Olive, who is walking away. She says with genuine curiosity that Ms. Olive, not even her closest friend, noticed that she never eats peanuts due to her allergy, so how did Olive find out about this important information? Olive has a complete nervous breakdown while thinking to herself that it's obviously not like she can tell Tatiana that she read about this detail in the original novel, so what should she possibly say to explain her knowledge?